We have a quorum in the room, so we're going to get started. Okay, declarations of interest. Seeing none. Confirmation of minutes 32 from April 19th and minutes 33, special meeting of April 30th. Carried. Communications. Councillor Fleury is asking to waive the rules to lift all three of the communications. Can you do that?
They're all related.
What?
They're all related.
Yeah, so carried on lifting all three?
Sure.
Okay. We'll return to that as the first item. Item number 1, commemorative naming proposal, Gabriella Dabrowski Tennis Courts. Ward 10, carried.
Carried.
Item number 2, commemorative naming proposal, Joe Mesner Boat Launch, also Ward 10, carried.
Carried.
Item number 3, commemorative naming proposal, Lieutenant Colonel William G. Barker, VC Park, Ward 13, carried. Item number 4, commemorative naming proposal, W.O. Wilhelmina Walker Park, Ward 13, carried.
Carried.
And item number 5, commemorative naming proposal, Ed Laverty Fields. It's in Ward 16. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick acknowledgement that we do have the daughter of the late Ed Laverty in the gallery today, Tammy Laverty. Just wanted to acknowledge her and her family's efforts in moving this file forward and having got to know the family over the last 6 to 7 months. A true privilege and honor. The community consultation resulted in 22 yeas and no nays. There is very strong support for this naming, and look forward to seeing the unveiling later this fall. So I just wanted to acknowledge her today.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington, and welcome Tammy to the committee, and congratulations. So carried. Okay, item number 6, Ottawa Paramedics Service 2017 Annual Report. There is a presentation, so that's going to be held. Item number 7, 911 Annual Report. Can we receive that? Received. Item number 8, Security and Emergency Management Branch 2017 Annual Report. Received. And item number 9, updates to the closed circuit television CCTV policy. Okay, so we'll hold number 9 and return to it. So going back then to the first held item, which are the communications, Councillor Fleury.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Janice and Shelley while they grab a seat, and I just wanted to follow.
Excuse me for just a second, and while they grab a seat, because you started out in French, I'll just mention that, s'il vous plaît, notez que l'interprétation simultanée est prévue lors de la réunion d'aujourd'hui du comité des services communautaires et de protection. Les unités et les écouteurs sont disponibles à la part.
Excellent. Merci, Madame la Présidente. Janice puis Shelley, je voulais débuter en... Premièrement, merci d'avoir pris le temps de mettre sur papier certains des faits qui sont importants pour les membres du comité, mais aussi pour la communauté, juste pour avoir une meilleure compréhension des différentes responsabilités, puis des différentes approches que l'on a. I wanted to begin and really ask you about the housing first, because you and I had a conversation following the memo, and I appreciate that there's the definition now of housing first. I just wanted to take a second and understand in terms of our funding pool. Obviously, we have existing pools of funds that are going to existing providers. But how are we reprioritizing to really support the Housing First initiatives? That's maybe the element. You talked about the programs, you talked about some of those funds, the goals of Housing First, but I'm not understanding how the shift, I know it's one of the tools, but I'm not understanding how we're shifting towards it, and maybe you could give us a little clarity on that.
Madam Chair. So in 2014, we had a redesign of the homelessness service system, and it was really in response to some changing federal requirements that we invest at least 65% of the federal homelessness funding we receive in Housing First services and programs. So prior to 2014, we probably had 13 positions across the city that we would have called Housing First. So we did that RFO, and at that point in time, we intentionally redesigned the system to be able to meet that federal requirement of the 65% investment. And over the years, as we've received additional federal money and also recently new provincial funding through the Home for Good program, we've expanded our Housing First services from a total of about 15 workers to there's 65 different workers across the city that are working in Housing First programs. So as we continue to receive new money, we're always looking at what are our needs, what shifts do we have to make, and aligning that money appropriately, while also making sure that we continue to have other complementary services and programs around Housing First, because as you mentioned, it is just one tool.
Okay. And do we feel that, so my understanding speaking to you is that you believe it is a successful program? And so how do we expand it if it's successful? Like, I guess that's the core question is, are we awaiting provincial and federal funds to be able to invest more, or are we realigning some of our internal funding streams to support it even more? Because it seems to have shown its success. It doesn't mean that supportive housing isn't needed, but it has shown some pretty interesting progress.
So to date in our Housing First program, Madam Chair, to date in our Housing First program, we've housed 619 long-stay people from the shelter system that have very complex needs. In December and January of this year, we added 10 new workers to the Housing First program. We added peer support workers for the first time, and we actually received new funding to allocate up to 310 new housing subsidies, housing allowances, to help make housing more affordable for people who are in our Housing First program. We're also, the federal government is also...
Can I just stop you? Just in terms of clarity, so what's the number you said for the increase in subsidy?
So before we were able to offer a housing allowance of $250 to people in our Housing First program, and we know that's not enough for people who are living in very low incomes, Ontario Works or ODSP, to get into the private rental market. So the subsidy has increased to up to $500.
Okay. So just in terms of clarity to that, our costs in the Housing First program is obviously the subsidy component for the unit or the room or the housing, and then the other one is for the support system. Who pays for that? Is that out of our social services?
So the support component right now is paid through different pots of money, federal, provincial, municipal funding.
Through us though, or through agent? Like, are we funding Options by Town or other providers to offer the supports, or like are they accessing funding directly from provincial and federal funds?
Madam Chair, no, we are funding those organizations directly through mainly federal money, and some have some small pots of provincial money, and also through our own housing and homelessness investment plan.
Okay, and finally on the Housing First front, so if we had unlimited amounts of money, how many people that are in shelters right now could go into Housing First? Like, what's the backlog? What's the waiting list?
Madam Chair, we currently have approximately 600 and some names on what we call our prioritization and matching list. So these are people who have had the assessment tool we use administered to them in the shelter system. They have long shelter stays. They're chronically homeless, so they've been staying over 6 months. And they have moderate or high needs. There are, however, many other people in the shelter system. About 60% of people in the shelter system are people who are really there, don't need the case management supports, but need the affordability piece of a housing subsidy to get into the private rental market.
Okay. And Chair, these are my only questions for Housing First. I don't know if there's other members of the committee that had Housing First questions, but I do want to speak to the other communications items. Okay. So now there's another memo, and thank you again. I mean, this applies to the 3 memos that it's good information for the committee and for council to have. I want to go back to, under the Housing Services Act, we have a duty as a service manager. And you articulate, and it's reassuring to know that we're achieving and meeting those requirements. let me maybe use a bit of a sport analogy. It's a different, in my mind, are we a coach or are we a general manager? And let me explain to you the difference. A general manager lets the coach and lets the players go out and play on to the whatever sport they're playing. We're in the NBA and NHL playoffs, so everyone, sees the importance of the team effort and so on. I guess where I feel the confusion is I feel that our response is very general manager-like when I believe that we should be a head coach. We should coordinate who goes on the ice and who comes off the ice and the time of play, and that could be related to funding and priorities and so on. So can you clarify, maybe if you can use my terminology, which one are we? And because I don't feel that we're coordinating. I feel that we're certainly ensuring that the value for money is met and that the goals in each programs are met. I'm not debating that. But I'm not feeling like we're pulling and the priority, or that we're shifting the priority set. And I want to know how the department feels our responsibility is towards that.
Madam Chair, so in the broadest sense, when you talk about service system management, it is really about allocating the funding as per legislation, ensuring accountability for the funding, making funding allocation decisions, but primarily also it's about service system coordination and planning and building capacity within the sector. So if you take our requirements, all of our requirements are outlined in contracts which have, specific expectations and deliverables and outcomes, and they really do vary according to the different funding stream or program that the contract is under. And of course we monitor all those contracts. But from the system planning capacity, we either chair or participate on a number of system planning groups where we're trying to drive the overall coordination of the system. They're everything from the Housing System Working Group, which provides advice and guidance on the 10-year housing and homelessness plan, the Community Advisory Board, which provides advice and guidance on homelessness services, and then there's various other tables that we chair, for instance, a network of general housing providers, a network of Housing First providers, both the operational staff and the management staff. We work with our social housing providers through different teleconferences, and we participate in different consultations at both the federal and provincial level to make sure that we are participating, we're setting the direction, but we're also being very inclusive and collaborative in setting that direction and bringing in the wealth of experience that our partners are bringing to the table.
Okay, that's fair. I guess finally on that, I think it'd be important, we have a wide range of providers, people that do great work and every day are helpful, and I guess often we get caught in between the day-to-day operations and the future planning. I think for members of council and maybe for the general community, the department having a position paper as to not just the 10-year housing and homelessness plan, but a position paper to give us a bit more, maybe not micro, but a little more structure as to what would, in a perfect world, how would we get there would be a little more helpful in seeing that coordination. Because I'm glad to hear that we're chairing a lot of these working groups. I'm not privy to those discussions or to the feedback we're getting or to the alignment. So I think elevating that to a position paper, I'm using the word position paper, there might be a different communication format that might be better, would be helpful in the right term, because we talked about, and we did pass, I believe, the motion around a housing primer. And I think in the context of a housing primer, having those objectives clarified as to where we want to go would be, to me, it's not that we're doing something wrong, it's about putting really a clarity as to where our goals are, and so that our providers can align their strategic plans as well with that, and so that the community can feel supported and an understanding of as to where we want to go.
Madam Chair, we can certainly incorporate that into the housing primer, which we've committed to do. And we also, just to your point about strategic planning, we're often called upon to provide comments and feedback on different organizations' strategic plans, because they are reaching out to the city to say, here's what we're thinking. Is this where you're thinking? Are we all both going in the same direction?
Okay. And Madam Chair, on the final communication, I want to thank staff for, I know that they did a fulsome review with our existing agreements relating to making sure that everyone can access the services. I know that, for example, one of our providers is changing their brand exactly for that purpose of getting away from not spirituality, but faith. You talk, I think, in the report it talks about faith-based. And we have to be very careful because everyone has their journey and everyone has a choice, and we have to respect that. I think our goal as committee is to ensuring that barriers to those who need the service aren't there. So could you speak to maybe some of the goals there? Because I understand that you've done the review, that you'll continue to work with providers. It's well identified in the memo. How do we get there? Like, have you identified some risk? I know that in terms of the funds that the city gives to the different agreements, we are ensuring that there's equity and that there's no barrier relating to religious or gender. But maybe you could speak to that.
Madam Chair, certainly, as you mentioned, in meeting with some of our faith-based organizations, it was made very clear to me that, they've really moved on from that kind of charity, faith-based model of the past to really a social justice model where everybody receives service and it's an open door, welcoming environment. Certainly, the organizations themselves do a variety of activities at orientation or intake through residents' bills of rights to make sure people are aware that services are available and accessible to everybody, and what those complaint processes are if people don't feel that they're receiving the services that they need. All of our contracts include explicit reference to the Ontario Human Rights Code, where people cannot discriminate on different protective statuses, including creed or religion is one of those statuses. One of the things that we are undertaking a review of our emergency shelter standards over 2018 and 2019, and we are looking into some of the resources that are available through the Ontario Human Rights Commission to say how can we embed some of their best practices into our contractual, into our contracts and our standards. And we've also, reached out and gotten posters around Ontario Human Rights Code to put up with our providers. So we're looking to work with them to make sure that this is not an issue.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Anyone else? So can we receive all three of the communications? Received? Okay. Turning then to item number 6, Ottawa Paramedic Service 2017 Annual Report. I invite Chief Miles Cassidy to come forward with his team. Good morning, Chief Cassidy.
Good morning,
The floor is yours.
Perhaps I could just introduce my group here. We have Lisa Petch from BSS, Deputy Chief Furlong, and General Manager DeMonte.
Thank you.
General Manager, yes. So it's been a long time since I've been before the committee, about 11 years now. I'm very happy to be back and to present our annual report for 2017. So we'll start with a service profile. We have 3 divisions in the service: the operations, logistics, and the CAC, the Central Ambulance Communications Center. Logistics and operations are 50-50 funded with the province-ish, and the dispatch center is 100% funded by the province. We're provincially regulated and certified by the Ministry of Health. That happened last year, 2017, for both the CAC and the operations. The dispatch center is a regional center. It dispatches for Prescott Russell and Cornwall SDG, as well as the City of Ottawa. So the dispatch center is over 10,000 square kilometers and dispatches for a population of about 1.2 million. The service has 645 FTEs, and 77 of those are with the dispatch center. Our annual response volume has increased every year for the last 5 years, and in 2017 the volume was approaching 140,000, 137,000 responses. That translates to a call every 3 3/4 minutes. Of course, these calls don't come in a regulated period of time. We have a call demand curve that increases during the day, and we can see calls come in at rates exceeding 1 a minute, 1 every 2 minutes, and but overall average about every 3 3/4 minutes. Our response time standards, as indicated in the report, are based on the Canadian Triage Acuity Scale, which has 5 levels of priority. Our highest level is the CTAS 1, as well as the sudden cardiac arrest. The percentile rank performance target is established by council and is for the entire city area, and is reported that way to the province under legislation. Response time performance in over 2016-2017 has improved, and we have met the response time targets as established by council for 2017, and that is in no small way due to the investment in resources that council has provided to the service. We do have to mitigate our responses and our resources, and we have a multitude of programs and initiatives to mitigate the demand on the service, as well as to maintain the resource levels within the community. Community paramedics is one of those mitigation strategies. This is geared to and intended to reduce the 911 call volume on the service. As well, in partnership with the LIN over the flu season of 2017-2018, we established a specific flu community paramedic program, and that program, at the end of our assessment of it, diverted 1,124 patients away from emerge departments over the course of the flu season. So this is 1,100 patients that didn't get transported to hospital, that were assessed and treated in place by paramedics using their current skill set. And the translation of that load, both on the paramedic service and on the hospital emergency departments, was significant. We also use paramedic response units with a single paramedic in a car as opposed to an ambulance. These paramedic response units are distributed throughout the city, strategically placed to respond to emergency calls, and once the transport of that patient has been arranged, the paramedic response unit returns to service immediately in the community, as opposed to going to the hospital or transporting to the emerge. This, of course, reduces the time on task that resource is being applied to a particular response, and allows us to reestablish that coverage in a more timely manner. Mental health has been an initiative and certainly focus of mine for the staff and the paramedics and the communications officers, the frontline staff. It's a very difficult job that they do, and the focus in the last number of years by employers in the emergency services realm, as well as the provincial Ministry of Labour has been ramped up in the last number of years. We have looked at and implemented a number of programs to support our staff as they do their work in the community, including a couple of things that aren't seen in many other services. We have Max, our therapy dog, who is at the headquarters and on the road with his handler. The R2MR, which is listed on the slide, is Road to Medical Readiness, which is a military-developed mental health monitoring system that we will be implementing with the Ottawa Paramedics Service in the fall of 2018. This program has been modified from the military to all the emergency services, specific to the emergency services, and we'll be providing that training to our staff and supervisors. It's a 4-hour frontline training session for the staff and an 8-hour training session for supervisors. We have a 50-member peer support program, which is a large contingent of staff who are trained and prepared to provide support to members who require it, and also another significant investment in the mental health of our staff. We've also, can I just go back to the one? We've implemented a family day for our new hires. It's important, we feel, that the staff, as they come into the job, are supported by their spouses and their families. And to that end, we invite those family members into the orientation program with the new paramedics to allow the staff or the family members to get a feel for where the people are going to be working and what they're going to be doing, and give them an idea of how they can support those staff as they continue along in their career. And in summary, our services, they're incredibly dedicated people that provide paramedic services. It's often said it's a calling as opposed to a job, and I believe that. The people that I work with are outstanding and provide this service in very difficult times. We've met the council-approved or council-established response time performance targets in 2017. The call volume continues to increase, and we expect that to continue. I'm born in '63, so I'm kind of the tail end of the baby boomers, and everybody else, this wave is really starting to hit us now, and we need to be nimble. We need to be responsive to the needs of the community. We need to be responsive to technology and processes as they change. We're focused on that, and we will continue to monitor our performance and report back to committee and council on that performance. With that, Madam Chair,
thanks very much, Chief. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks very much. Nice to have you back leading the department. There are lots of questions for you, and we'll start with Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chief, for your presentation, to your staff. Thank you for your service to our city. I do have a number of questions stemming from your annual report. The first table is the response volumes on page 4. You note that they have been increasing over the years. I'm surprised how they're increasing at a diminishing rate, which just means they're still going up, but year over year the percentage increase is going down. You've just said the wave is coming. Are we anticipating maybe another influx of calls as the population continues to age?
So our statistics show that the major client group is an aged group, and that demographic itself is growing as far as the statistics will show. So if our client group is growing, our expectation is that that our call volume will also increase. Now, being prepared for that means that we will do whatever we can to mitigate those calls. We'll try to have the calls, through education and through medical and health education, reduce the emergency aspect of it. If people are able to call before things get to a crisis point, that helps everybody as well. Community Paramedics is an initiative that is designed to decrease that emergency load, and as I said, not just for the paramedic service, but for the greater health care system in general.
Is there an extra stream of training, like geriatric training for your staff? I know that training covers, from 0 to 100 plus, but if our population is getting older and will continue to old, is there extra care or training that they should be provided?
I wouldn't necessarily call it extra. The system is intended to provide care for our largest group of clients, which is the elderly. So their training right from the start of college is geared towards towards that demographic. However, there are some ancillary training processes that we've put in place specific to this flu initiative that took place over the winter. So that required a change in our processes, for instance, providing IV starts to people in nursing homes. That's something that we don't normally do, but in this case and for that purpose, we did take on that training and that skill set to provide that treatment. Yeah.
This may seem like an odd question, but were all calls medical calls? And I ask that because last month with the fire department, they provided us their call volume, but not all fire department calls were fires. There were other reasons that they were being called. You don't talk about sort of false alarms or false calls where you show up and there was not a medical emergency. How can I see that data?
So I'll say that every call that's received at the dispatch center starts with a medical aspect to it. Whether or not we arrive at the scene and find an actual patient there is occasionally that does happen. There's no patient found. Calls will be initiated by the public based on an individual who's lying on the ground. Well, by the time we get there, that individual may not be lying on the ground anymore, and so there are those types of calls. From the one perspective, it does, even that initiation utilizes those resources.
Right.
So there is a workload there. The time on task for a call like that would obviously be decreased.
But is that number significant enough that you can report it to us in this annual report? We were concerned that, for example, the fire department has 9,000 false alarms a year, which is a significant number, huge increase year over year. Given the limited resources that we have with the paramedic service in the city, Are all calls legitimate? Is there a need for better public education? Is there an abuse of the system? That's what I'm trying to get at.
So I'll go down that path a little bit. We do have a education program underway on when to call 911 and when not to call 911. So there are obviously there are stages or states of severity of calls, and although those are prioritized at the dispatch center, we are obligated to attend each one of them. Not every patient gets transported to the hospital. Not every patient gets a treatment, and not every patient is found. There are activations of the system for things like a collision, a motor vehicle collision, that results in no treatment or transport, but again does translate into workload on the system.
Two more questions, Madam Chair.
Sure.
On page 13, and I don't know if this is for you or for Mr. DeMonte, there's talk about paramedic service headquarters has reached its maximum capacity related to vehicle deployments and staffing. You've initiated a review for the build of an annex. After today's meeting, can I get much more details about your capacity issues, why you can't use existing buildings elsewhere in the city, those types of things? This looks like we're going down the road of an expensive maybe expansion, but can I just ask for more information?
Absolutely, Chair. And this is the look ahead that the service always provides in their reports. So this is about the headquarters. As you know, the model, everybody starts at headquarters and then deploys from there, with the growth particularly in the West End. And this was part of our long-term strategic capital planning since year one. We're now at the stage where we're starting to look for another kind of single start building more in the West End, but absolutely we can give you that. It doesn't mean additional posts or stations. As a matter of fact, we're collapsing that, but we can give you more details to look at that, and I'm sure Chief Cassidy and team can give you the metrics why we're there.
Sure. My last question is regarding code zeros. It's not mentioned in your report. I raised this with the general manager last year. Is there a reason why it's not in this annual report, given the high profile? And the term is code zero, right? When there are no available ambulances? Correct. Okay.
Yeah.
So can you just comment on the state of code zeros in 2017? Are we making improvements? Can we see the data? I've had ongoing conversations with the GM, but I think this is an important metric to comment on.
The code zero situation occurs when the demand exceeds our available resources. It may occur several times within a short period of time. It may occur for an extended period of time. In 2017, it occurred 322 times. And when that occurs, there still remains the paramedic response units as response capable. There is a tiered response agreement in place with police and fire to respond to those calls as well. The response time performance of the system exceeded the council approved response time targets, and as I said when I was discussing the response volume, the rate of those, the reception of those calls has a very big impact on the resource availability. And when we have hours of high rate call volume, those resources are first of all dedicated to the call itself, and then they go to the hospital. And as the calls kind of progress and build up, more vehicles are at the hospital, reduces the resource levels, and that situation can present itself.
But just so I'm clear, if I am helping someone who's in cardiac arrest and call 911, are they dispatching an ambulance exclusively, or are you going to send the entire cavalry? Will the fire department be dispatched as well?
Yes.
Just looking at the fire medical calls in 2017, for their report went up 7% in 2017. So they're now responding to 4,300 medical calls a year, which is a drop in the bucket compared to how many calls the paramedics respond to. But are they being sent when we know there's no close ambulance, or are they being sent for those most high critical calls because we want who's ever closest with an AED with training, you get there first, and then we'll work it out?
It's B. So if it's dependent on the call type. On the tiered response agreement, it's sudden cardiac arrest and unconscious. So those, but they're not sent on calls that aren't of that nature. Right. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Egley.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. First question, I just want some clarification. So you gave us a slide with the number of calls that you have, and it's trending upwards. Is a call necessarily a visit or a deployment, or are some of these things actually handled over the phone?
None of them currently are handled over the phone. There are systems in the world that do that, and that is dependent on the tool that's used at the communications center. That's not the tool we have. We have a commitment from the Ministry of Health for the implementation of a new call-taking algorithm for the fall of 2019. We haven't written that down in ink. But this is medical priority dispatch system, which is used throughout the world, and has the ability and specificity to tease out those calls and give us an ability to potentially reduce our responses to those to callers. Yes.
Yeah, I guess what I'm thinking of, you sort of have the telehealth where you get a nurse at the other end. I'm sure there are some calls where if the paramedic was on the other end of the line, he or she could give appropriate advice without having to jump into the vehicle and spend the gas and do everything else. Is that something is that what you're talking about in the future? Or?
That is what we're talking about, and those discussions though are being held with the Ministry of Health, and our intent is that we have the ability to at least explore those possibilities with this new tool.
Okay. The next part I want to talk about isn't really a question so much, but a plug. Your influenza program that you introduced, I just think is unbelievable. We hosted an event in my ward. We had wonderful turnout, lots of people. The staff member we had in place was great with the community, lots of good information available. Wonderful with the kids that needed to get the shot, because we had some reluctant children there whose parents wanted them to get the shot. So can we be assured that that's going to be an ongoing program? And if it's not, is there anything we as a committee can do to make sure that does come embedded in your regular suite of options?
The program, as it was established for this year, was dependent on funding from the LIN. And they too were quite pleased with the results of it. So our expectation is that we'll be returning to that type of arrangement, or one that might be tweaked for even a higher performance. So we're hopeful that will continue. At this point, we see no reason why the LIN would not re-engage us, shortly, I guess, in the summer months to prepare for it. It was a bit of a last-minute implementation last year. We were approached, I want to say November, when the hospitals and the greater healthcare industry kind of looked around and thought, oh, well, here comes the flu again, and what can we do about it? And so it was a bit of a late start for last year. This year we'll be even better prepared, and we will certainly be pursuing it with the LHIN again.
Well, if you or Mr. DeMonte could come back to us if there's any kind of an issue there, and a letter from the chair or the mayor or some combination thereof, or a resolution passed, because, again, I don't know what my colleagues' experience was, but it was very, very positively received, and I think really helped to fill a gap out in the community.
Chair, I'd just add, I'd be remiss to add the other element too, and put our hat on from a health perspective. And Mr. Cassidy's been Chief Cassidy's been very forceful with this, with our partners at the province. This is truly a healthcare need, so we have to continue to ensure that it's 100% funded by the province, these programs, and it's not on our tax bill here. So that may be something we come back, because those programs have a tendency, oh, they're really great, and we'll 50-50 fund it with you. Our position is they are really great, they should continue. It helps the larger healthcare system, it helps our volume, and we should expand that. We're talking about long-term care facilities now where the medics can go in there and start IVs and start treating patients there and not transport them to the hospital. But that has to be 100% funded by the province, so we can have staff to do that, and it's not removing staff from our prime mission, which you're responsible for, the emergency response. So that is something that we may take you up on with regards to support at the political level. If we start seeing a tendency of the Ministry of Health bureaucracy to lean towards starting to download that to us, we're not on for that. Our prime mission is emergency response. This other stuff is good. We got to continue to do it, but that should be 100% funded by the province.
Yeah, no, well, please do. And again, I think it gives you also an opportunity as a service to be out there and let people know what you do. And speaking about what you do, your last or second last slide had to deal with the mental health issues related to the service that your members provide. And I think we all know that we can't really appreciate some of the horrific things that they must come across in the course of doing their work. And you have a number of innovative programs out there, like the therapy dog. Are there other things, though, that you want to try? Other things that you need committee or council support to pilot or to look at in order to support the members out there?
We are always looking for mental health is a complex issue and very individual, and what works for one doesn't work for another. So one thing that we've certainly promoted is the open discussion of these issues. There are other programs, there are other tools that we've got a couple of meetings set up for Friday, I believe, for another type of tool for staff. So we want to have a lot of tools in the box. And at this point, to answer your question, we're managing that internally. And although I'd like to certainly make it part of our general discussion as to the safety of our staff. But we'll continue to investigate any type of approach or tool that we could use to help with the staff.
Well, I appreciate you putting in the report, because more often than not we get the stats, how many calls and how many this and how many that, and this gives us an opportunity to see the impact on our employees as well, and the good work that you're doing to address that, and puts it on our radar to know that's a real incident of the job that your people do. So I welcome that as part of the report, and I hope it continues to be part of the yearly report to let us know how our people are doing.
And Chair, Chief Cassidy, and from a broader governance perspective for you responsible for all the emergency services, this is certainly, there's not only the stigma and the work we have to do, and we know the data now, we're doing some research projects with some universities to see the impact, but we're doing it broadly as a team with our police partners, even though they're separate with the board. And I know recently the board received from Chief Bordelot some data showing that they're having some challenges there. It's got managerial impacts and WSIB, and then you have to backfill and all that. so we're doing that both with paramedics, with police, and also fire, and the tri-services team. So we're really taking this as a broad approach. Reduce the stigma, give support to staff, look at literature, work with academics and doing research and understanding our baseline. And yes, as a manager too, how does this impact our bottom line as well too, and how do we have the health? And there are tragic incidents happening as well too that we want to avoid, that we're hearing across the country and here in Ottawa as well too, where people take their own lives in emergency services because of the burden that they've had over the years. So this is, as this chief has mentioned, one of his prime initiatives, and not only I'm very supportive of that, that is the key to success, to the health of our members, to be able to serve this community. So thank you for also mentioning.
Thank you, Councillor Eglin. Councillor Drews.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, Chief, and for the presentation. I just want to have a few questions. One of them is how many FTEs so far we have hired this term of council?
Throughout the term of council?
Yes,
it's been 50 as approved by council. Yes.
How many cars?
I believe it's six over the term of council. Yeah. As additional staff. Yeah.
And how many of those right now they are on service?
The last group is going on the road as we speak. That's a group of 12, and so our hiring processes utilize of course, the college graduation times. So that group is going on right now. We're also as part of that hiring group, we replace our attrition groups as well. So there's actually more than those 12 going on, but as an addition, those 12. Right.
And those numbers are not, I'm assuming they're not included on the report because they haven't been on the service yet.
Correct. So their impact hasn't been felt yet.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yes, we will.
So on top, when this report was drafted, we still have, that was not including is it 12 and 14 or just 14?
So there was 14. One was a supervisor. One was a EST. So a support worker. So 12 paramedics and support.
Why I'm asking you this question, so are we catching up to where we want to be? As you know that in the last 3 years we realized how the system was not really serving our City of Ottawa resident, and the chair recognized that with the mayors, and we started to kind of put in perspective hiring right away, and we were able to pull some money from the reserve to hire first batch in 2016. Where are we, you see ourselves into catching up to that, where we want to be?
So our performance, response time performance is our benchmark, and we are meeting that now. And so as the call volume increases, those additional staff will maintain that level of performance. That's our expectation. That's our analysis.
When these new hires are in service, Councillor Brockington brought up a point that how many, in the report there is no highlight on how many times we hit code zero, but can you elaborate a little bit more, like the problem with code zero, and I think it is not only the services on the street. Is that kind of relay back to the held up at the hospital? Like in an average, when you hit code zero, how many ambulances you have at sitting at the emergency room? Because last couple of weeks there was an emergency and it was a shot on the TV, and you look at the lineup of the ambulances is incredible. And in my experience, some incident happened in my ward, and you're not stranger to it, that at one call we had to wait for an ambulance, and you had 17 ambulances sitting at the emergency. That's 34. So we could hire 200 paramedics how we're going to be able to fill that gap. I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk about it and see how this committee can help you, because I understand we could hire another 100 paramedics tomorrow, but if we do not have the download in the hospitals and working with the hospitals, you're not going to be able to reach your target regardless how many hire we give you.
So thank you for the question, Madam Chair. The hospital issue, also a complex one. However, the position that we've taken with the hospitals has been to modify their processes to eliminate the waiting of paramedics in the emerge. And we're actively having these discussions with them. As you say, it's an obvious impact to, we measure the number of vehicles available at any given time in the city. And, if we're, and I wouldn't even use level 0, I'll say if we're at level 6 or 8, and there's 17 at the hospital, well, that 6 or 8 could then be 23 or 24. I looked at my math guy there. And so was I right? Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. So that that impact is huge on the response time performance, on the staff as well. The staff don't want to be in hospitals, and like you say, when there's 17 of them, that's 17 patients with 34 paramedics looking after them. No other place in the medical field where you have 34 people looking after 17 people. So it's inefficient, and we're working well. We are working well with the hospitals. I certainly don't want to leave any impression that this is not a issue that they recognize and prioritize. And we anticipate that we'll have shortly some movement and some improvement on the offload issue. But currently, it is a drain on our resources, and we need them back. Now, I should say that that in itself does not create more patients. So any additional resources for the system are not. It doesn't translate to more paramedics in hospital. It translates to more paramedics on the road.
Okay. Chair, if I may, and I'm sorry for the chief, I'm going to intervene here. This is one that's a big frustration, and the chief has to have a relationship with the hospitals, have to work with his partners. But I want to be clear. He's made a very good point. Two things. You fulfilled your responsibility from a governance perspective to the needs of this community to supply this service. As we have growth, you've added resources. So that curve, that's one bucket of this thing. The other bucket, and I'm going to be a little more blunt, we've assumed this responsibility since 2001. Offload delays been a problem since 2001. 17 ambulances on offload and in the hospital emergency room. I would say as a manager, if I was the boss of that organization, I would say there are people that should be leaving the organization and we should rethink the way we do things. It's been 18, 19 years of this. There's a problem of competence and managerial management of emergency rooms, and I know that's crossing a line because hospital institutions are sacrosanct in our community. They are great institutions. I sit on one of the boards of the hospitals in this community, a foundation board, and I'm very active and I believe in the work that they do, and they're tremendous institutions. But the emergency rooms are a disaster, and there's no excuse. When we fulfill our responsibility, a paramedic goes to the scene, arrives at the emergency room, the patient should be taken charge by the physicians and the staff of the emergency room. If they got to hire more staff and put more beds, so be it. You're doing your part of the equation, they're not. And I've got a big issue. Mr. Cassidy's working with the biggest hospital right now, which is our huge challenge, and the COO and the VP of that institution is promising zero offload delay. I hope that's right, because we've been doing this over and over again and expecting different results, and it's been 18 years that we've been having offload delays. So that's capacity that should be on the street, not in the emergency room.
Mr. Ramonte, I really appreciate you being blunt, but you're not really being blunt. You're being reasonable and responsible for the city of Ottawa, because, Madam Chair, I do want to make sure this committee understand I do want to make sure this committee understand the issue, and I want to make sure that we understand the issue and really what we are going through. Like what we are hearing from our general manager and from our chief, we as a committee, and I think I'm not sure how we're going to present it to the committee, but maybe you should, as a chair and working with the mayor, maybe we need some pressure from our committee to talk to the hospitals, to the Minister of to the province, to making sure we're really having this understanding, because the wait and the download in the hospital obviously is not working. When you have a 17 ambulance sitting at the hospital with 34 paramedics and you have calls, and when this hit the street, if it's our parents or one of our kids, God forbid, need a paramedic because the hospital are not able to take the patient, I don't think we are in the business of emergency rooms. So I think to help the general manager and to help the chief, I don't know how we can put a direction to them or to keep us updated on this conversation, because this is an important gap in our services.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Drews. I guess the first question is why in 17 years if we continue to have this problem? But the other part is, I seem to recall last year when you were here, you were talking about the nurse program, and I thought you gave an indication that things were improving significantly. So is it or isn't it?
So the offload program is something that's been on for some time. We currently receive from the province of Ontario, and there's a note in the report, $1.5 million that we forward to the institutions, and there is an impact. There's a decrease in some of the wait times, but it's not resolving the issue once and for all. When we arrive in an emergency room, we should be able to transfer the patient to the staff, and what we hear is we don't have enough nurses, we don't have enough beds. Well, when we come to you, and Chief Cassidy comes to you when call volume goes up and say we have to adjust things, why aren't the hospitals doing that in their institutions? They can reallocate resources to the emergency room. So as indicated here, you can see the year over year, the time gained, and it's positive, but you can see 2016, 2017, it's kind of flattening out. But the time spent in excess of 30 minutes in the emergency room continues to go up year over year, and that's the time that's got to go back on the road. And this is a fundamental management problem. It's like, resolve your issue. You know what your call load is coming into your emergency room? Put the appropriate staff and beds to handle it. And I know the institution will talk to you about alternative level of care of patients, no long-term care beds, but again, that shouldn't be downloaded in the impact on the emergency side of response to the community. So there's work being done, and I know I was a little blunt this morning, but Mr. Cassidy and his team are doing work with the hospitals, but it's something that we've been doing this. We've been funding them $1.5 million a year. Provincial money flows through us, identifying the hospital institutions, but things aren't changing. So I think it needs a bit of a shake-up, and I think the hospital institutions need a bit of a wake-up call to fulfill their responsibilities.
Okay, and is the Ontario Paramedic Association actively working with governments on this?
Both the association and the Chiefs Association have been working, and it's bad timing now. The writ's fallen, so we don't have an interlocutor to really discuss with. The minister is not truly available, but discussions have been taking place at the highest levels of the organization and the provincial government. And this is not, and to be fair, this is not an Ottawa problem. It's a problem across the province. If you look at what's happening in Hamilton, I know council there has intervened, and I don't think they've been successful at all as well. And they've had situations where there have been shootings and there were no ambulances available, they were on offload, and it's made the press. So it's a huge challenge, and it's something that we're going to have to grapple with and resolve once and for all, because this is impacting our capacity.
Not to get too far into the weeds about the offload nurse, but the offload nurse is right now a triage destination. So the paramedics arrive, and the triage nurse will say to them, your patient can go into OBS, your patient can go into the waiting room, your patient can go to the offload nurse, or stand there and wait. And that's what we're trying to change. What we'd like to happen is that the hospital staff receive the patient and then shepherd that patient through the triage process without our being necessarily right now the paramedic service is a triage destination as well as the offload nurse. The offload nurse has a number of criteria and exclusions, and really the basis of our approach is to remove those exclusions so that the hospital staff assume that responsibility at the threshold of the facility. That's where we're going.
Thank you, Councillor Drews. You finished?
No.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I really appreciate if you could keep updating the committee on specifically on this subject, on the subject of the offload, and we're making sure you're making headways and working with an agreement with the hospitals. And if we need to address any issue on a political level, I appreciate Mr. DeMonte that you come to our committee and then make sure you ask for help. I want to change the subject we always hear that we're talking about how our neighboring municipality come and then make calls in the city of Ottawa. Just an incident happened. It happened to know I was aware of it. We made a call to the 911 Ottawa paramedic, and then someone from Prescott Russell showed up at the door at Osgood Care Center. Within a minute behind him, Ottawa paramedic showed up. And by the time those guys came into the building, the Ottawa paramedic, they were able to be in and then working right away on the patient. But the Prescott Russell paramedic really didn't, they kept going back in their way. And is that kind of a call to and this is a count on us as when they talk about we're getting lots of calls in the city of Ottawa. Is that a count to us as a call? If it just be for them to show up and stop at the building and keep moving on? And also, I want you to explain a little bit about the municipalities, why the municipalities comes always to the city of Ottawa, and how many calls they do in the city of Ottawa. Just to collaborate a little bit, because there is an anxiety in the community, people saying we don't get services from the city of Ottawa. Well, but it happened to be that the closest to the call. So I'd like you to explain that a little bit and open and then collaborate a little bit about it.
The Ottawa Central Ambulance Communication Center is operated by our staff under the policies and procedures and manual of practice as provided by the Ministry of Health. And that manual of practice dictates that a dispatcher when assigning a vehicle to a call, will send the closest vehicle in time to that call, regardless of municipal affiliation. So your experience of having an Ottawa vehicle show up right behind is more typical than one would think, because that assessment of the closest vehicle doesn't take into account where that second closest vehicle might be, which may very well be within an acceptable and optimum response time capability. But yes, that would count as a call for Prescott Russell being completed in the city of Ottawa. Now, there's a reason that the extra municipal resources are within the city of Ottawa, and that's because the hospital system provides levels of service within the city of Ottawa that don't exist outside the city of Ottawa. So patients will that's one reason. So patients will be brought from other municipalities into the city of Ottawa, dropped off, and now that vehicle is going to return to its municipality empty and available for emergency calls. The legislation or the manual practice says that the dispatcher will assign that vehicle. So, as a matter of process, those vehicles are within Ottawa and available and subject to that assignment. The other thing that happens is specific to our friends in Prescott Russell. Their hospital choices are Hawkesbury, Winchester, and perhaps Cornwall or Alexandria. and Ottawa. So in 2017, there were 3,000 occurrences where Prescott Russell vehicles picked up patients within Prescott Russell, not in Ottawa, within Prescott Russell, and brought them to an Ottawa facility. So that's 3,000 possibilities or potential return trips where they're available for those calls. That's 10 a day. So yes, it's going to happen, and it wouldn't matter if we were at level 50. If that vehicle, and the other thing is that those hospitals are within our highest call volume areas. So our highest call volume, coupled with available resources, is going to translate to assignments for those vehicles.
Is that around how many calls Prescott Russell does a year?
I believe it's in the neighborhood of 6,000.
So that's mean 50%. So we know that 50% of their car come in here, and then we know that if they're offloading on the hospitals and leaving back to their station, and there is a call on Carling Avenue, and even if our ambulance one block before, they'll be dispatched first. And we are getting so many of those calls, and they're 50% of the time they are in the city of Ottawa, between Renfrew, Prescott Russell. Why we do not have report to explain to the public and to bring up to explain to them and educate them on what's going on. And my issue is why these are counted as a call, and how many of these calls incident happen during the day. So if they tell you, I don't have the numbers, but I'll round it up for you. If they say you have 1,000 calls that those municipalities are servicing, well, half of the time they have to be here. That's why they're servicing. We're not calling them. Can we distinguish those numbers and those calls and be able to identify and bring them to that committee? Or have them at least ready when we're being hammered and attacked by our neighboring municipality. They're saying that we are not stepping up to our resident, that's totally not nonsense and not true, because we are really working on our services to bring them up. Yes, I know we had an issue last 3 years and we've been working on, but right now we added 50 new paramedic, we have 6 new cars, and sure, this is the province will dictate in the dispatch where their car going. So why we are not being out publicly talking about it, and I respect that sometimes we need to talk about the political and not being out, throwing at each other allegation, or not allegation, just excuses, but this is really, we need to know exactly the number that Prescott Russell's, Renfrew, and all these municipalities that they say that Ottawa is not servicing our community. That's not true. And I want to make sure that Ottawa Paramedic take the credit for that, because you know what, these are just, I don't think they're true numbers, and we need to know the right numbers.
We can provide those.
I would really appreciate those numbers, Madam Chair.
Is that it?
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor DeRusse. Councillor Fleury.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Chief Cassidy, I just wanted to commend you for your consumed professionalism with us and the clarity as to what you're describing this morning. I also want to expand this praise into the service, because we're at committee, but day in, day out, 24/7, 7 days a week, 365. When someone calls 911, we have teams on the ground that are there to respond. So it's important for us to understand the strategy, the statistics, where the gaps are, and you've been very clear about some of those challenges, but also some of those successes. So thank you for that this morning. I have a few questions and I have a few comments. The first question is, when I look at the stats, and I just want you to confirm, it says that I guess this is urban areas, but it says that our target is 6 minutes, and that we're meeting that around 70% of the time. Can you clarify, that to me, how is that a passing grade? I guess that's the challenge that I have is, what is our percentage of objectives, and then what is the risk of not having 100% of calls answered within that time, just from a general standpoint?
I'll tackle the second part, the 100%. That statistically and operationally, as you increase your percent compliance, it gets exponentially more. There's an exponential necessity for more resources. So if you picture the city of Ottawa, the 3,000 square kilometers, we know a vehicle can cover X number of square kilometers within a 6-minute response time. How many is that? That's a lot. And they would have to be available, okay? They would have to be available all the time. 100% of the time they would have to be available. So you would have to have, we had a mantra in the day of the right resource in the right place at the right time. And in order to blanket the entire city of Ottawa with resources that were able to respond in that period of time, you would have to have all the resources that are dedicated to do the calls, all the resources that are at the hospital, plus all these available resources as well. So in order to and have that happen 100% of the time. So one call that has a multi-casualty incident that takes half those resources away, your percentage is going to drop right there. So the 100%, what I'm kind of beating around the bush is, the 100% is a goal that really has a statistical challenge to it that is probably not. We would not be able to meet that with any reasonable efficiency and cost. To go back to to what happens, what happens with the 70%? So what we show is a 70% compliance to that 6-minute response time. But that response time was specific to the sudden cardiac arrest. Includes the usage of the AEDs, includes the arrival of a tiered response agency, includes the use of a private AED, and we capture those times in order to meet that response time. So our response time in that specific case is dependent on the arrival of that electricity to the patient. And that's in cases of confirmed sudden cardiac arrest. If we can get there, if we can have people call 10 minutes before that arrest happens, then that helps everybody. And that's an educational piece that you don't wait. You call when you're having those symptoms, and we'll be there. But the ability to meet that 6-minute at an increasing percent compliance increases the cost as well exponentially. And we work within our budgetary means and utilize the resources we have as efficiently and as intelligently as we can.
Okay. Maybe two requests in that front, and that's why I wanted to ask the question, because in my mind there's subtle things that we can do in the community. Resource is one of them, but the other one is public education, and I have two requests for you to consider. One, which is there has been campaigns that I've seen in different provincial jurisdictions, but I'd love to see a local initiative as to the driver behavior when there is an approaching emergency vehicle, specifically ambulances, that I'd love for us to push through our City of Ottawa comms. I use my example. When I got my driver's license, we got that course. Then you're on the road for years and years, and some of those behaviors become acquired, and you're not. You make constant issues on the constant decisions on the road, and I'm seeing more and more issues relating to driver behavior surrounding emergency vehicles, which I believe to influence some of our delays or some of those times.
The other request is there an opportunity to work with Ottawa Police? So one which is inform the public of what we're trying to do and what would be the best behavior in different conditions for the driver, including city of vehicles and OC Transpo. And the other one is relating to, could we conduct a pilot where a police cruiser would follow for an hour or 2 hours one of the paramedics' vehicle, and as they go to emergency, make the point of, hey, we're tagging the bad driver behavior, because and there's a lot of things we could do, and we could put more money in this, and we continue to advocate for the province or some of the issues at the hospital, which are very relevant. But let's not lose focus of what we can control, and that's public information, and that's using some of our enforcement bodies to pursue and continue that. I think it'd be important for OPS to get onto the right along, if you will, with one of our teams and address that. So could you consider looking at those two measures?
Yes, I'd make a couple of quick comments there. The Safer Roads Ottawa has a campaign that's going on right now. I think the Marc-Antoine Deschamps, our PIO, is sitting behind me, frantically taking notes, I'm sure. And just on driver behavior, there's really two aspects to that, and one is their awareness and situational awareness of what's going on around them. Often people don't hear or see the vehicles approaching. There is a change in legislation that's taking effect July 1st to equip ambulances with blue and red lights as opposed to the white and red lights that are currently the standard. This has been shown as a safer and more visible scheme on vehicles, so we'll be pursuing that as well. And we do have certainly contacts within the police department we could contact and see what they thought about your suggestion as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fleury. Councillor Kadri.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Excuse me. Thank you, Chief Cassidy, for being here this morning along with your team and for the annual report. Just a couple of things before I get to the report and some of the questions I have on the report. I want to compliment not only you, but obviously your men and women about the excellent program, as Councillor Aguilar was mentioning, about the Influenza Program out into the community. The reach out to the community has been fantastic, and the response coming back from the community has been very, very positive, to a point where now people are asking for home visits by the paramedics, which again, if it could be added within the current funding, that would be another great piece to add to that service. And I have to agree with General Manager DeMonte, the fact that we do not want this expanded service that you're providing to the community, your men and women are, to be downloaded to the municipality as a cost. I think that cost, as Mr. DeMonte mentioned, should be strictly a provincial cost at 100%. And obviously, all the provincial partners locally with Champlain Lynn, and that's where you have to reach out to with them. The other piece to that is also the fact that you work with Ottawa Public Health when you went out to provide this service out into the community. And I want to thank you for that also, that you reach out to the right partners, not only in the community, but within this environment also, to say, here, how can we help you? And it was more of that offer rather than saying, we may want to take over your service, as an example, okay? So I really do appreciate that aspect. The other thing is that in terms of the mental health aspect that Councillor Aguilar was speaking to, my question is related to that, but in more specifically to our personnel or paramedic personnel. Are they provided education? And I'm sure they are. I just want a little bit of background on that education that you provide to the personnel, how to handle a particular situation in terms of mental health, either from the public perspective, where they are responding to a call, but also from the internal perspective, with their families and what have you, their own mental health cases. So if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
The programs that are provided by this service as the employer are varied, and as I described, our peer support team is a key group there that are there for consultation and support for staff. I believe the initial training as paramedic students are in college is an area that we need to improve, and we consult with the colleges to increase that kind of pre-employment awareness and preparation for what this job entails. That is an element that continues to require work. The mental health processes that we have in place in the service, again, such a personal issue with our staff, with the people I work with. The goal again is to provide as many different approaches and different tools that anybody that might request help is able to get that assistance. I think the emerging normalcy of discussing this issue is in itself an assistance to staff. Even if they're not actively seeking some sort of counseling or intervention, if they see that their colleagues are having this discussion, and they don't need to participate in it necessarily, but just having that go on in the workplace helps to remove any kind of lingering stigma about it, and provides them, a kind of a welcoming workplace for those discussions to happen.
Thank you for that. You mentioned about involving some of the educational systems or institutions in that training. Obviously, that started and it's well on its way. Are they 100% cooperating with the service in terms of providing that education piece to new recruits coming into the service? It's
an initiative that's not just local, but I sit on the mental health awareness group with the OAPC, the Ontario Association of Paramedic Chiefs, and provincially it's an initiative that's being pursued through that group as well. The colleges have a provincial organization that we're in touch with and working even from that aspect of it. It's not complete. It's not. It's people's different opinions about what that education, how that education might translate into a course or actions at the college. Those discussions are still going on, but we have the communications open and we continue to pursue it.
Thank you. And again, workforce that is treated properly obviously works better in the service, whether it's yours or the other two services that the city provides in terms of EMS service. Coming back to the report, on page number 5, under the response volume by ward, the bottom 5 words seem to have obviously the lowest numbers because that's how they're ranked on your report. The uniqueness that I find in those 5 words, each one of them seems to have a rural component of some sort. Some are completely rural, some are, just that component added to it. My question is, how many of the calls that are being responded to these 5 wards are from the outside municipalities rather than the city of Ottawa paramedic service? Would you have that number?
So just to clarify, how many of those calls are attended to by other municipalities? Is that the question?
The numbers of calls that are here are obviously for the Ottawa paramedic service that they provide to these areas. How many other calls that are not part of this number that are provided by outside agencies in those suburban rural wards?
So the calls that are listed there are the total calls within the area, regardless of who.
Okay, so
regardless of who actually attended to them.
Okay.
Yes.
And again, maybe this is a question that you may not have an answer for right now, is in those call volumes, any explanation as to why those are the lowest call volume wards?
Call volumes are generated by, obviously by population, and denser population will intuitively produce more calls. However, there are other aspects there as well, and specifically if there are long-term care homes or retirement homes, or an element of demographics that might call more often in an area will drive that call volume too. But generally, it's a population-based response.
So when you talk about a population response, and maybe I'm going a little off the topic here, Madam Chair, the age factor of those communities, and that's where I was thinking about in terms of that rural component, is that a factor on these numbers?
Yes, I would say yes, that the age factor and the demographic in a given area will certainly drive the number of responses required.
The other last question that I have for you, Chief, and we've had discussions over emails about one particular call, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of that, but the concern obviously is from the resident that call anyone with counselors' offices, and they want to talk about their experience with the service, and they do not or don't want to provide any of their information in terms of confidentiality, or they may be thinking that in another service call later on that month, they may be put down to the bottom of the call volume list, that kind of stuff. So I just want you to take a moment to explain that to the public, that that's not how the service works. And service works, I mean, there's always the odd exception where a service, may not have properly handled the situation or a call, but you're there to investigate those kind of scenarios. So you're not necessarily looking for the information from the resident about privacy issues related to, you're looking to see how you can investigate that call.
That's absolutely correct. And we have a group within the organization, it's a professional standards section, that is tasked with looking into any anomalies that might be brought to our attention. And certainly we welcome those opportunities to self-examine and look at ways to improve. And certainly no one should be in any fear that there would be any consequences to that type of interaction. It is something that we do regularly. Now, having said that, I'd say that we receive far more compliments than complaints, and the interaction with our clientele normally consists of that hour or 90 minutes, and I think part of the discussion around the flu program has established that when we are able to have a more normal interaction with the public, it's very well received, and so we promote those types of interactions as well.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you again for the report. Mr. DeMonte, the $1.5 million that you mentioned this morning that you're almost directly handing it back to the institutions, have we ever gone back, and you mentioned you sit on one of the boards, a foundation board, have we gone back to the institution and say, give us some kind of a feedback on that 1.5, how was it handled, where did the service was increased, and that kind of scenario?
So, Chair, and I'll let Chief Cassidy talk a little bit more. Yes, there's criterion that's already established from the province. We make a request annually for offload nurse money. When it's authorized, it flows through us. And with Chief Cassidy, the LHIN, and all the institutions, the money is allocated based on volume, acuity, challenge of the hospital. So it really is a team approach. There's also criterion based on that with regards to their performance that's also analyzed. And you can see part of that in a very macro level for your understanding. They look at more data, but when you look at the offload times broken up, but they know it by hospital, etc. And actually discussions are currently underway. Should we continue funding everybody equally, or should we start paying for performance? Those who are performing more, give them more money and kind of squeeze the others to kind of step up. But at the end of the day, and I'll let Miles talk a little bit about the whole process and the good work that they do with those institutions. At the end of the day, I don't even think we should be in that business. It's their responsibility. They should just receive our patients, and if they need money from the province, they should ask for it and reallocate. But I'll let Chief Cassidy talk about that. I'm playing the bad guy this morning.
Now that all my negotiations tactics are out, so the offload nurse program itself is a program, and there are checks and balances through the province. The province doesn't just give you $1.5 million to do whatever we feel fit to do with. We have to provide statistics back to them, and tomorrow is actually the deadline for our 2018 submission under that program. So it's got a fair amount of sophistication in the program itself, and we want to use that as a leveraging tool to improve the performance of that particular program.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kadri. Councillor Kakish.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation, and welcome back 11 years later. I wanted to start off by talking about in your slides about the growth impacts, and you talk about how we're at capacity and in terms of the existing facility at Don Reed. You allude to the fact that we're sort of saving up or planning for the future growth or development with a new building. Can you speak a bit about that in terms of where exactly, a bit more detail on what you have here in the report in terms of potential timelines? Is that funded through DCs or provincial for the capital, and that sort of information, if you have anything?
The building was constructed when I was here in 2005. Open. If you've been there, it's a landlocked property. There's no expansion capability physically on the site itself. And it was originally constructed for, I believe, a capacity of about 350 staff members. So over the years, there's been significant modification to the interior of the building and our processes to make the building work for what we do. For example, the staff used to have a full height locker. Well, the staff now have half lockers, and so that we can cram more into the locker room. The original design in the early 2000s included two of these facilities, and so really what we're engaged in now is very preliminary discussions about both what the building, its capacity, based on what programs might move from the existing facility, what programs might stay there. Do we construct another facility strictly for our PRUs, for instance? Do we maintain mixed response capabilities out of both stations? Is as far as staff goes, how many staff do we kind of need to decant out of Don Reed to make Don Reed function better? And so those are the discussions we're having right now, and we've engaged a number of different departments within the city to have those discussions, but they're very preliminary at this point. As far as location, we've said that it needs to be west of where we are. That's and a couple of criteria on what that property might look like for some high-speed ingress and egress to the building on some major roadways. Those types of it's very preliminary at this point.
So in terms of the funding for that, the capital of that, are we putting DCs away for that, or is that provincial funding, or how?
Perhaps I'll ask.
Okay.
So,
GM to...
Well, we've been just starting to talk with our financial colleagues. So there was some DC funding as part of our long-term plan for some posts that with this model we could actually have some efficiencies and some cost saving, so that DC funding can go there. The other option, as the headquarters, as you know, both the headquarters and the communication center, they're part of the paramedic headquarters campus. They were both done on a 3P model, so that could be another option. The option of that, when we have the provincial funding, is 100% of the operating cost goes on 100% of the cost of the building goes on our operating side, and therefore the province funds 50% of it. So that may be advantageous from a financial perspective. That's some of the preliminary work that's being done, versus DC that would be 100%. Then city cost after the DC, then the operating cost becomes. So we're looking at the models of which would be more cost effective, more efficient, and also from a timing perspective, we've kind of, Mr. Chief Cassidy didn't get into it, but even the vehicles, there's no longer enough room, and there's regulations that require at certain peak hours when the maximum fleet is back in the building. There's not even enough room in the building to keep the ambulances, to maintain them, put the drugs, so some have to go outside and are running with their engines on. So there's a bunch of logistical challenges we're trying to resolve. So the model is going to be the one that we feel will give us the best financial return to be able to achieve our objective, and because we have a very strong funding partner in this product, it may be a similar model that we have today, and they'll pay 50% of all the operating costs.
Okay, so when we did Don Reed, it was a P3 for...
It was. So we had a piece of city land that we had, so the land was $1. We design build with a 3P, 20-year outlook. It reverts back to the city for $1, and since then, our monthly lease, I guess, for lack of a better term, the province pays 50% of it.
Okay, and just to be clear, so this is a future facility just as large or maybe a bit smaller than Don Reed. We're not talking about a little poster.
No, we're talking about another single start station, and it would be, I suspect, as large as Don Reed. The headquarter administrative component obviously wouldn't be there, because we've got that there. We don't need that. It's really to redeploy as the West End growth is and our capacity, and to add efficiencies and capacity for better response as well too.
And how does this, I guess I see it sometimes when I'm driving home. I see the paramedics, the vehicles parked near the bridge near Claudette Park, or in the parking lots there. And so, are they dispatching because they don't have room, or they don't have geographically, Don Reed is not ideal, or how would that dispatch model and deployment work if there's, let's say, a station in the west part versus where it is now, which is, I'd say, southeast, I guess, of the city?
So we maintain a priority post list for our deployment strategy that includes both our PRUs, where they are going to go when they're available, and where the transport vehicles are going to go when they're available. So the implementation or the addition of another start station really wouldn't impact that list itself. We would still deploy to those priority posts. Your consideration then would be, because the post essentially is treated as a call. So you would send your closest vehicle to that post. So the addition of a start facility in the West End would allow less travel time to posts in that area. Mm-hmm. It's not all great. It does add a complexity to the return of vehicles at end of shift when you have two separate destinations for them. It adds a complexity on the dispatch side as well when those vehicles are coming on shift. And so there are certainly impacts and consequences to adding in that alternate start post. But given the circumstances that we find ourselves in, if that's necessary, then we have to adjust.
Okay, and I appreciate that it's preliminary, but in terms of timelines, are we talking about in the 5-year horizon approximately, or is it more than that, 5 to 10?
I'm an ambitious person, yes. I'd like to.
Okay. With regards to the Heart Safe City program and the DFIBs that were added in 1,100, I think, different, or 1,100 DFIBs in different facilities. I don't know if it was 1,100 public spaces or not. I assume they were a bit less than that because some of them have a couple.
Yes.
But is that program done, or are there still, I don't know, legions or whatever that are asking for it, and are we still continuing that program and putting DFIBs? Because we look at the numbers and we see, the amount of lives that are saved as a result of putting that program in place in the DFIBs in the public spaces. So are there more people coming to us or our partners asking for funding to put them in public spaces, and is there going to be continued?
We get regular requests for AEDs to be placed within the community. We have a finite number of them. We're just in the process of replacing the ones that we have, and so it's an evolution there. And every request we get, we assess, and we try and find ways to make it happen. We're certainly not. We're not looking for ways to not do it. Back to our sudden cardiac arrest statistics. The availability of AEDs is key to that particular medical condition, and as technology improves, perhaps we'll see a day where your defibrillator is on your hip in your phone. That's where everybody should have one, really. And I compare them to fire extinguishers, and I know most people have a fire extinguisher in their home. The availability of those AEDs and the cost of those AEDs is certainly the personal ones. You can buy them at Costco for $900 or something. Mm-hmm. And why those aren't in people's homes is a mystery to me, actually. Mm-hmm. Most of our cardiac arrests occur in the home. They don't occur in public places. When they do, we're prepared. Mm-hmm. But if someone has a condition that even remotely points them towards that type of condition, the first thing they should do is have one of those. We do have a loaner program as well that will provide to people post surgery or something. But that if people are waiting for our service to arrive, then they're waiting too long, really. They should have them as close at hand as possible.
Mm-hmm. And so in terms of when you do get requests, you have a pot of money set aside for helping those people out. I know you said we'll make it happen, but there is some...
There are, yes. There's a finite number of machines, and as with everything else, we prioritize them.
Okay. Can you give us a quick update? I'm on the Board of Health with Chair Caudry as well, and we know the opioid crisis has been a big one in the last little while before us there at the board, and very, I assume, on staff at Paramedics as well. In terms of that, I know you have the task force and participate in that with our partners. What are the numbers like? Are we seeing any kind of decrease, or is it a flattening of the numbers based on the peak that we saw in the last little while?
Perhaps I'll ask. Greg has that information. The numbers in our grand scheme of things are not, 137,000 calls. Mm-hmm. The opiate ones are a very small fraction of those. Yeah, just annual number, monthly numbers. Are they increasing or decreasing?
It's stable.
It's stable in single digits per month.
Yeah. Single digits per month?
Yes.
Okay. With regards to mental health, and I know this is becoming more and more sort of on our radar now, and we're proactively talking about it. At the fire chief also was here recently and talking about that as well. And in terms of the prevalence with the paramedics, is it similar to the other first responders, or is it lower, higher?
So there is some work done at the national level, and the three emergency services are more prone to, we're not calling it PTSD anymore, PTSI, stress injuries. Of the three services, actually, this is the service that has the most suicides, the most PTSD. And it's, when you think of it, the logic of what they're exposed to, it makes sense, and that's what the researchers and the academics are telling us. So certainly for this service, it's a major challenge. And the second most what we're seeing as the national literature is police, and then fire would be third. But basically, altogether, you can see for the three chiefs, Chief Borlow, Chief Ayad, and Chief Cassidy, this has become a priority. We want to, and that's why we're talking, destigmatize it, provide services. The councillor, Kadri, said it earlier, to healthy staff or staff that can better serve our communities. And there are tragedies that are happening almost weekly, unfortunately, across the country. We get the list of people taking their own lives in those three categories of services, and we don't want to live that here. So we're working hard. So yeah, this is the service probably of the three that's got the biggest challenge with regards to the impact that we're getting from the national literature that's coming out, that's being published.
And this is obviously a very difficult job, and you see, I'm sure, a lot of things that are very horrific in some cases. And I was just wondering, in terms of the recruitment process, when we do that recruitment, what kind of testing do we do in terms of, I'm sure the fire and others have theirs, and in terms of paramedics, are we doing, psychological testing as well as other forms of testing, and people understand what they're getting into and what they might see on the job and some of the pressures and stress that's created as a result? So
the recruitment process includes those types of, I call them more consultations. It's not and I differentiate. In my previous employment, we had a specific go and take this test, and we would get a report back. Now, it's not a multiple choice, and it's not a math test. It's very ambiguous, and no one is really able to say, don't hire this person because there's going to be problems, or the contrary, that this person is going to be great. Well, that may or may not be true. And the resiliency of the individual, really, until tested by the job itself, that's when it comes out. So, having said that, we've introduced some more sophisticated physical testing. We have a sophisticated knowledge-based testing, and this is another element that we're exploring as far as the recruitment process goes. But again, the other services have had that type of testing in place for a lot of years, and their experience as the career progresses it doesn't necessarily follow what those original recruitment tests were. So I think there's certainly some value in it, even just in the exposure of the recruit to that element. Well, they're testing me now for this. It puts it to the front of their mind. But the actual results and how much we can rely on those tests in the future remains to be seen. But we are looking at having how can we better assess those recruits for that type of resiliency.
Okay, I think that's certainly a worthwhile.
Yes, absolutely. We don't want to hurt people, certainly.
In terms of, I know a lot of people are always lined up to when you recruit, and there's no shortage of people who are interested in joining the paramedics, but just following up on that, how many people, or what's the percentage of people who drop off after, let's say, a year or so and say, this is not for me, as a result of that recruitment process?
I don't have that right at the. We don't have a lot. We don't have a lot of resignations.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. I know that when we put up a job posting, we get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applicants, and we hire in like a dozen or 20 out of 800 applications. So for them to get to that point, they're really what we consider the cream of the crop, and we provide them the supports through their career as best as we can, and give them that support as we go along.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, Chief.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Kakish. Councillor Eglai.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for letting me back on the list quickly. I just want to follow up on one of the answers that you gave to Councillor Kakish about DFIBs, and you thought everybody should have one in their home. What's the policy on city buildings? Because I don't think we have one in all our community buildings, and sometimes there's a bit of a challenge either getting the DFIB unit or getting the training to go along with it. So what's our policy citywide? And maybe Mr. DeMonte is in a better position to answer that question.
Yes, thank you. Chair, when the program was initially implemented is when we took over the service in 2001. We had the first batch that was out, and the policy at the time was to try to blanket all city buildings. And I know where you're going. Part of that, however, was, and Chief Cassidy mentioned it, a restriction of the number that we had. And there were criteria that were medically established by a working group, which included some emergency room physicians, about how one should prioritize. So there had to be, a building where there was a certain volume of human beings that would be crossing that building within a 24-hour period. Age and certain activities were also considered. So there are criteria, and then that's how they were established. So in most of our city buildings, which I would consider our large buildings, that happened. Then once that was done, the next phase was we got funding from the Maharaja Ball, we got funding from the Heart and Stroke Foundation for other DFIBs. Then we started looking at secondary sites, and then legions have come up, and if people fundraise or private institutions, we support them. So we may not have every city building as part of the policy, but the policy initially from 2001 was let's blanket all our big city buildings. So obviously this building, Ben Franklin, that kind of thing, all those buildings would have it. All our, and then also the policy was make sure we put them on all our OC Transpo vehicles, put them on all the marked police vehicles, which we did, put them on all the fire trucks, which we did. And as Chief Cassidy says, the data shows that 70% of cardiac arrests do not occur in homes. So you're talking that was to be able to target and get into the homes on the mobile vehicles. So there wasn't, and there hasn't been a review since. I guess maybe that's how I should. There hasn't been a review since, so we haven't talked about that.
Yeah, the buildings I'm most concerned about, and where I've run into issues, Mr. Monty, is city buildings, but city buildings that don't have staff. So field houses, buildings associated with community parks and skating rinks, which in certain cases in my ward are very highly programmed. There's people in and out there all day, but there's no city staff. And so some of the community associations become a little frustrated in terms of how can they get, especially as our population is aging, there's more seniors programs happening in these buildings. So maybe you and I can talk about that offline as to what some of the options might be for them. But I think it's a discussion that we should have.
Be pleased to do that with the team.
Yes.
Okay, so we're at the end. Anyone else have a question? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chief Cassidy. And can we receive the report? Received. Okay, moving on to item number 9, updates to the closed circuit television policy, and Councillor Fleury, you have that.
I'll be short, Madam Chair. I don't know if Mr. DeMonte, you're the right person to ask the question. Mr. Porter, okay. So I'm interested in pursuing conversation and discussions with the community as to how we expand CCTV, but I am uninformed as to where we have CCTV cameras and what is the purpose of the program. So it's hard for me to engage with the residents and the business community to see, for example, if public areas, because you speak to public facilities but you don't speak to public areas, would be of interest or would be captured in this context.
Maybe just put a little bit of context around it. There's 3 different programs with respect to the CCTV in the city. There's the traffic cameras, which are used to monitor traffic. OC Transpo uses cameras particularly for surveillance to ensure the safety, the public safety component, and security with respect to their operations. And then the corporate security has a number of cameras, about 1,200 cameras at city facilities for the purpose of the security of residents. The OC Transpo, their policy went through last year, and their policy includes surveillance in terms of monitoring the activities, and particularly at platforms or at bus stations for safety reasons. The cameras within corporate security at the facilities are for security, but they record their recording devices and record video images, but they are not actively monitored. So after an incident, we may be able to pull the video and provide that video to police. And overall, that is the purpose of it as a security element, partially for deterrence, but it's not something that is actively monitored. So that's the difference between the programs between OC Transpo, the city, and traffic services.
Okay, and are there instances where at city facilities we've put CCTV cameras external? So I'm thinking, a facility near a wading pool or near a park of some sort. Have we expanded outside of the internal components of the building?
Yes, we have to a degree. At City Hall, there are cameras that monitor the City Hall property. Okay. There's, I think, close to 140 cameras at City Hall, internal and external. We do not put cameras at parks as a natural part of our process. What we do, though, during the summer is we do put cameras at the pools with basically the monitoring or a capability to review the cameras to ensure the safety so that people don't hop the fence, or if they do hop the fence, that they don't damage the property. That's the only incidents where we actually have cameras outside in public spaces that are operated by the city.
Okay. So for the purpose of knowing how and when to engage, I will give you 3 scenarios, and I'd love to see what sort of thought you have around them. So it's not in my word, but you think of like a Dragon Boat Fest, massive amount of crowds into one city park. Have we put some thought into temporary conditions where there is a purpose? Lansdowne Park, where there's massive events, we own the property. There's gatherings we had last year with the Grey Cup and so on. Byward Market, where there is a lot of public land, there's a lot of activity. So I'd love to hear from you as to what are there restrictions, are there thoughts as to what is. I guess I'm not understanding the fulsome of the program in that context.
With respect to that, there's the Ontario Privacy Commissioner has kind of set out guidelines with respect to cameras. And the overall principle there is that you use cameras and you survey the public not as a last resort, but when all other measures have been taken into account. And currently the city has chosen not to engage in the 3 scenarios that you've selected. Not saying that it's an absolute in terms of how we look at that, but at this point we do not make use of the cameras for those kinds of activities that you described.
And that's from what's the decision? It's a policy decision. It's a financial one. It's a
currently right now it's a policy decision, and that goes back to a broader question of do we want to be like London, England, where you can monitor somebody from the time they leave their home till they get on the bus till they go to the shopping mall. This city has chosen in terms of its respect for the personal privacy is not to engage in that. But if there is a change in direction with respect to that policy, we'll abide by that. But currently the policy decision has been to respect the personal privacy of individuals within the city.
Okay. And I'm not leading one way or the other. I'm really asking questions on the policy just so I understand clearer. My last question on the matter, Madam Chair, is so we will have cameras within LRT stations. I'm thinking Rideau Station particularly where there is the tunnel. But what about the monitoring near the stations? So you think, the bus stop on Rideau, some of the challenges along William Mall, like how are those integrated in the conversation?
So I can't speak for Transportation Services and General Manager Manconi, but his cameras are monitored. So at the stations within the public space, they are being viewed actively. But coming back to the Privacy Commissioner, it's quite explicit that outside that property, even if the camera is able to view it, they have to black it out. And that's the same thing here at City Hall. And the example would be we have cameras that look at Lisgar and look to the point of Lisgar Avenue. That camera could be tilted up and look at the building across the road. And that's considered appropriate, so we've put processes in place to block out that building. So we can see within the city property, but we do not extend our field of view or field of vision off the city property as a respect to privacy.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fleury. Councillor Brockington.
How many times a day do you think my image is captured on a video screen or a video camera? At City Hall? No, just in an average day. I would not know the answer, sorry. Probably over a dozen. My child's school has camera, the bank, grocery store, the bus, anywhere downtown, corners of buildings. We've got red light cameras. Not that my image is not captured on those. But I ask that because you have a paragraph that says the city is committed to balancing safety and security benefits derived from the use of CCTV with an individual's right to be free from invasion and privacy. And when I read that latter part, I think, okay, there's the limitation, that we're still worried that people are going to feel that their rights are being infringed upon. And my only point is we're now in a society where our image is captured, even unknowingly, multiple times a day in the interest of safety and security. Some people are concerned. When you said the swimming pool, I thought, people in bathing suits, and, that seems like maybe we're stepping over the line there. But you were talking about people who are basically entering the property after hours. But I get multiple requests on pathway networks, the airport parkway bridge, places where people may feel secluded. We know that there are cameras at the transitway station, but as soon as you come onto city property, there's nothing. And there's always concerns about, cameras are a false sense of security, the imaging is not good, there's, expense to this. So it's always striking that balance between, as you say, safety and security benefits, but also, I think, not getting too carried away with people's concerns about privacy just because we're in a society now where video monitoring is much more acceptable than it was X number of years ago. And when you look at other jurisdictions like England or even America, it's becoming much more prevalent in that society. So why am I saying this? Just to let you know that if there are opportunities to use CCTV, and Councillor Fleury gave some examples, in the future, and if you doubt whether or not their support, certainly come and have that conversation. But there are strong benefits to having CCTV, particularly in a capital city. We don't have to elaborate on that now, but the challenges continue to increase, and I certainly want you to use every tool available. So thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brockington. Anyone else? So carried on the report? Sorry. Carried. Okay, notices of motion. Councillor Brockington.
So, Madam Chair, are we going to do a notice of motion?
No, I think we're going to waive the rules, but
Okay.
If you could just explain that.
So, to members of the committee, this was originally a notice of motion, but now the direction is to ask your indulgence to hear this today. So this is a motion regarding the bylaw review work plan that's going to happen for the next term of council. And the issue that's come up recently, and there have been some other issues regarding people who are pretending to be private transportation vehicle drivers and are soliciting fares or passengers, and in some extreme cases taking advantage of that situation and committing crimes, most recently sexual assault. So I'd like to, should I read the motion, Madam Chair?
Maybe not all the whereas, maybe just to be it resolved.
So what I'm asking is that staff be directed to include a review of the vehicle for hire bylaw as it relates to the visual identification of private transportation vehicles for committee and council consideration in 2019 as part of the bylaw review work plan.
So is that it?
Yes.
Okay, so can we waive the rules to consider that today, Kerry? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So given what I believe is the severity of people who are abusing the fact that our PTVs are not visually identified as an Uber or a Lyft vehicle. On May 12th, there was an individual charged in the city with 2 counts of sexual assault after allegedly posing as an Uber driver and trying to pick up women in the Byward Market. The police have confirmed that this is not an isolated incident in Ottawa, and certainly there are other issues in other jurisdictions. Other jurisdictions do have visual ID of their PTV vehicles. And basically today I'm just saying, look, this is an issue. Let's direct this as part of the review work plan that is a normal course of action when a new council takes over. And that's what I'm asking the committee to do today, that recognizing it's an issue and we want it to be reviewed. Part of it? Yes. Basically, it says this is an issue, and we want it to be part of the overall review.
Consider it as part of the work plan that's coming back in 2019. Councillor Nussbaum.
I fully agree with the fact that this may be something that we want staff to consider. I just want to make sure I understand, because over the last 6 months, there have been a lot of items that we had asked Mr. DeMonte to take on for whoever is sitting in the next council. And I just want to make sure that staff have an opportunity to do their regular survey at the beginning of the term, and they take the items and then they come with a proposed work plan. And I wouldn't want to prejudge. I mean, this is a very important item, and I'm not trying to minimize it, but I don't know compared to some other important issues. So I just would want to make sure that we're not prejudging staff's opportunity to stay. This is the recommended work plan, and if that's understood, then I think this makes a lot of sense.
Carried.
Chair, if I may, to reinsure the councillor, staff have worked with Councillor Brockington's office, and that is the proposal will be, so all the other issues, we're putting it together, it'll come back to the new term of council for you to prioritize and give us direction at what works. So this would be added to it, and it's not an issue.
Okay.
If I may, I just think it's important for this committee to send a signal now that we're identifying that there's an issue, and as part of our review starting next year, this will be part of that global list that we'll look at.
Thank you. Councillor Kakish.
Thanks, Sharon. I don't know in terms of, if this is obviously I hear what you're talking about, and I saw the article recently, and if it's something that we really want to do, maybe we can do it on our own, do some research. I know you did a lot of research as well through your office on some of the other hot files. So in some cases, I think Uber or Lyft or whoever have a sticker from them, I think that identifies that. So if there's stuff that we can do before 2019, we can take that offline and do it before then as well, so we don't have to send staff and wait for another 2 years to implement something to identify an Uber as an Uber or Lyft as a Lyft. So that's just another alternative too. Because if it is a serious security and safety issue beyond the one article that was in the paper, it's something that we can explore on our own as well.
Councillor Brockington.
That was considered because council has already decided on the taxi bylaw review. We've made a decision. That would require reopening the whole thing, which is quite a procedural challenge. And the advice from legal and bylaw was, given that the review is starting basically in the new year, that we give notice, we send the signal now, and it's my plan to work with both Uber and Lyft to flag this from my office, my desire that they take that upon themselves, but the advice from legal and bylaw is we just send this to the review as part of what's being reviewed.
And if that's the legal advice that we're receiving, yes, that's legal advice. It just seems like a bit of a, lengthy process to do something simple, but anyways, we can have discussions offline.
We are going to be looking at it, revisions next year, so this will just be something we consider at that time. So carried?
Carried.
Thank you. Okay, inquiries. Councillor Egley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is got to do with our donation bin situation in the city. We allow organizations to administer the bins at various city properties and also on other properties. So this is just in light of recent conflicts the city's experienced with donation boxes ranging from vandalism to illegal placement of donation boxes. Could staff review the City of Markham model for the placement and management of such donation bins and report back? I know you're already doing a review, but Markham is kind of a unique way of looking at the situation, and I just want to make sure we look at what Markham is doing as well.
Chair, bylaw staff has worked with the councillor's office. He suggested that. We're well aware of what he's referring to, and yes, we can absolutely do that.
Perfect. Thank you. Other inquiries? Councillor Nussbaum.
A couple of years ago, this committee identified the explosive Canada geese population along some of our waterways as an issue, and staff undertook to take steps to control the geese population. My inquiry is what steps have staff taken in this calendar year and where to act on that challenge which many residents have brought to our attention. Thank you.
Thank you. And have you written that out for the clerk? Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, other business? Adjourned.
Excellent. Just under the wire.